You might think pirates spent most of their time swashbuckling, hunting treasure, or shouting air at the top of their lungs, but their biggest enemy wasn't rival crews or the Royal Navy. It was something way more basic: staying alive with medicine that didn't kill them first. Let me tell you something wild about how pirates in the late 1700s turned poison into medicine. And trust me, the solutions they came up with were as crazy and surprising as a parrot with a drinking problem. Ever wonder how pirates managed to keep themselves from dying of infections, scurvy, or worse, after being stabbed with rusty cutlasses? Spoiler alert, it wasn't all rum and gunpowder. Back in 1690, pirates didn't have pharmacies or doctors handy, obviously. A single infection on board could wipe out a whole crew faster than a storm swamped their ship. But antibiotics, forget it, they didn't exist yet. So what did they do when their own medicine chests weren't helping, or sometimes were outright dangerous? Believe it or not, pirates were forced to become accidental chemists, distilling poisons to create rudimentary medicine. Yeah, turning stuff that would normally kill you into something that could maybe save you. Because nothing says fearsome pirate like carefully funneling toxic liquids through cloth to butch wrench a wound infection. The problem pirates faced was tougher than it looks. Imagine a ship with 50 men squeezed into a hull barely bigger than your average city bus. Now imagine those 50 men are constantly getting cut, infected, and sick, with zero access to a real doctor, hospitals, or even clean water for washing wounds. Over the months-long voyages across the Caribbean and Atlantic, these infections killed more pirates than battles. In fact, infection mortality rates sometimes hovered around 70% on pirate ships. And if you think fresh water was hard to come by, trying to get decent medicine was like striking gold, but with a lot more disappointment and a lot less shine. Now, pirates tried all sorts of medicines, some that sound downright bonkers by today's standards. Before they stumbled onto distillation, the first go-to cures were often deadly or useless. One favorite was swallowing heavy doses of mercury, yes, liquid metal, to cleanse the body. Bad idea, really bad idea. Mercury poisoning caused neurological issues, tremors, and well, definitely didn't help with infections. Some pirates tried bat guano, that's bat poop, just in case as a poultice, thinking the ammonia would kill germs. Let's just say it wasn't pretty. You can probably guess how that ended. Skin that looked like it belonged to a zombie and smell that cleared the deck faster than a cannon blast. Another legendary remedy was giving scurvy patients large quantities of gunpowder. Pirates believed the gunpowder's salt and sulfur content would cure their vitamin C deficiency. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Not exactly the recipe for good health, more like a ticket to a painful death or a bad night with stomach cramps. There were attempts to use everything from seaweed to heated tar as topical salves. The tar might have sealed wounds temporarily, but the sticky mess often caused irritation or worse, infections. Pirate ships looked like floating medical experiments gone rogue, with men plastered in anything from mud to fish oils trying to stay healthy. Here's where it gets interesting though, because pirates figured out something clever. Thanks to the rising popularity of distillation techniques in the 17th century, mostly thanks to clever sailors, chemists, and even barbers who doubled as surgeons, pirates started to distill alcoholic spirits to purify and even sanitize their medicine. You see, pirate crews had access to all kinds of alcoholic beverages, rum being the favorite, of course. But raw rum straight from the barrel didn't have a guaranteed potency or purity. That's where distillation came in. Distillation is basically heating a liquid to create vapor, and then collecting that vapor as it cools back into liquid, killing off the nastier microbes and impurities along the way. Pirates didn't know the germs part, but they noticed their distilled spirits made wounds stop smelling as bad, and sometimes didn't kill the wounded men as fast. Turns out, pirates accidentally discovered an early version of antiseptics when they started using distilled alcohol to clean wounds or mix with herbs. This was their version of a water treatment plant or sterile medical wipes, just way more hardcore and way less scientific. One pirate captain named Henry Morgan, yes, famous for his raids and as the namesake of a rum brand, reportedly used these distilled spirits not only for drinking, but to soak cloths that cleaned infected wounds. 70% effective. Who's to say, but from ship logs and diaries, sailors drank less and survived infections more often when hand distilling their booze compared to just swabbing wounds with seawater or plant pastes. Distillation also helped them make medicines less toxic. Sea plants and herbs like sassafras and willow bark contained substances that could be helpful but also dangerous if ingested raw or in high doses. Pirates discovered that by boiling and distilling these plants with alcohol, they could separate out the dangerous parts and safely harvest the beneficial compounds. Not exactly how modern medicine works, but pretty clever for some salty sea dogs with no formal training. That distilled concoction was their version of painkillers or anti-inflammatory treatments, something to dull the agony after a sword fight or a cannonball hit. Speaking of cannonballs, there's a hilarious yet tragic story involving Blackbeard himself, Edward Teach, the terror of the Caribbean. He was known to use homemade distilled tinctures for treating his crew's injuries, but one time, a batch went horribly wrong. They tried to distill a mix including some deadly nightshade berries, not knowing they were toxic. The resulting medicine caused severe hallucinations and vomiting, and a few pirates got so dizzy they fell overboard during a fight with the British Navy. Talk about ruining your fearsome reputation. Not quite the fearsome pirate takeover you want when half your crew is chasing invisible enemies on deck. Distillation wasn't just about medicinal drinks. It also helped pirates make clean water. Water on ships often sat in barrels for weeks, infected with algae and who knows what else. Pirates tried filtering their water through sand or boiling it, but the best method turned out to be distillation, what we'd now call producing fresh water from seawater by heating and condensing the steam. These makeshift water distillers on pirate ships were their version of mini desalination plants, providing safer water for drinking and washing wounds. Except their equipment was usually a jury-rigged system of copper pots, barrels, and leather hoses. Think of it like a pirate's version of a chemistry set that might explode at any moment. The knowledge of distillation spread among pirate crews like wildfire. Originally a secret of alchemists and apothecaries, distillation became the secret weapon against death from infection, dehydration, and poison. Many of those pirate distillers were originally ship surgeons or barbers who'd learned rudimentary chemistry. They weren't just swabbing wounds and handing out rum. They were mixing concoctions, keeping track of what worked and what didn't, and adapting recipes boat to boat. It was a kind of grim pirate science, driven by desperation to survive in a world with no help, but ingenuity, and whatever toxic plants or poisons they could turn to allies. So when you hear about pirates drinking rum until they dropped, know that sometimes that delicious liquid was actually their last line of defense against death. Not just a party starter. Their version of medicine was rough, often toxic, sometimes wildly ineffective, but occasionally a lifesaver. And the process of turning poisonous substances into usable medicine was one of the most impressive feats of pirate survival. After all, it's easier to fight your enemies when you're not dying from your own doctor's remedies. Pretty impressive for a bunch of lawless sea robbers with no formal education. But here's the kicker. They didn't stop at distilling alcohol. Pirates experimented with mixing distillates with heavy metals like copper and lead to create ointments believed to kill germs. Spoiler alert, that was also a bad idea. Chronic lead poisoning wasn't great for morale or coordination. Imagine the irony of a pirate crew too poisoned to even swing a cutlass, all thanks to their miracle medicine. Still, their willingness to tinker, fail catastrophically, and adapt is what allowed some crews to endure the worst conditions imaginable. And that's just the start of the story. How pirates turned poisons into medicines isn't just about booze and botched brews. It's about survival in a world that saw them as criminals and scoundrels, but where their own lives depended on becoming accidental chemists and early pharmacists. The real genius wasn't just in stealing treasure. It was in stealing knowledge from nature, science, and pure stubborn trial and error. Now hold on to that thought, because coming up next, we're diving into the specific distillation methods pirates used, how they brewed up their medicinal tinctures, and some truly bizarre ingredients that would make any modern pharmacist scramble for gloves. Also, the story of a pirate doctor who saved dozens of lives by distilling deadly nightshade into a topical painkiller. You won't believe which poisons became the most prized medicines on pirate ships, and how their crude chemistry shaped modern pharmaceutical practice. Sort of. But for now, just imagine a crew of pirates huddled around copper stills on the deck, trying to turn the nastiest plants and liquids into the stuff that kept their guts from falling apart. Pretty badass and a little bit gross, right? All right, now that we've covered how pirates turned poison into medicine using distillation and their trusty hooch, let's get into the nitty-gritty of how these sea rogues actually brewed their dubious remedies and what crazy ingredients made it into those copper stills. Because you can't just slap anything into a barrel and call it medicine. Well, technically you can, but that usually meant a pirate's version of bad idea, really bad idea. First up, the distillation setup itself. Pirates didn't have fancy lab gear or airtight chemical glassware. Nope, what they had were kitchen pots, old boilers, copper tubing sometimes stolen from ship fittings, and barrels rigged with leather hoses. Imagine a pirate's version of a chemistry set designed by someone who can barely read, but has witnessed enough maggot-infested wounds to know a bit of science might save your hide. These stills had to be assembled and disassembled on the fly, usually on the deck to catch some breeze for cooling the vapor. The process took anywhere from 24 to 48 hours to produce a single batch of distilled spirit or tincture, depending on the size of the vessel, typically between 5 to 10 gallons per run on average. For crews of 50 men that barely covered drinking needs, let alone medical uses, so they had to make every drop count. Now, you might guess that distilling alcohol was straightforward, right? Heat, boil, collect steam. But here's the catch. Distillation requires careful temperature control. Heat it too hot, and you vaporize deadly methanol and other nasty poisons. Too low, and you're left with a swamp of foul-tasting compounds that did nothing but make things worse. Pirates, of course, didn't understand chemistry, but learned by bitter experience which batches made wounds burn less, and which ones made crews hallucinate or collapse. Spoiler alert, it often took multiple disastrous runs before they got it right. Speaking of ingredients, that's where things get wild. Pirates weren't just distilling regular rum. They were packing in herbs, toxic plants, and minerals hoping to wring out medicinal magic. One of the most prized additives was willow bark, a naturally occurring source of salicylic acid, basically ancient aspirin. Yay, pirates. But raw willow bark, when boiled in too strong a dose, caused stomach irritation and sometimes lifeless bowel movements, which pirates were too polite to describe. Their solution: distillation tempered the potency by catching the vapor of useful compounds while leaving behind heavier, harmful bits. Result: a rudimentary painkiller that at least soothed the agony of cannonball hits or hacked-up limbs. Not quite Bayer, but close enough for a dinghy boat surgeon. Another unexpected star ingredient was sassafras root, which pirates distilled to make a tonic believed to combat inflammation and boost pirate vigor. Now sassafras contains safrole, a compound we now know causes liver damage and is outright banned in the US. But the 17th century hadn't gotten the memo. Pirates were basically inhaling the 18th century equivalent of clean vibes until several got pretty sick. Still, they kept trying because it was better than drinking brackish water or chewing on stale hardtack. Here's where it gets really fascinating. Pirates even distilled deadly nightshade, or belladonna. Today, belladonna is recognized as a poison, but in tiny doses, it can act as a painkiller or muscle relaxant. The key was extracting just enough to help without killing the patient, a razor-thin line. Enter pirate surgeon John "Doc" Maynard, who around 1692 captained a ragtag crew near the Bahamas and famously saved more than a dozen lives using nightshade tinctures. His secret was low-heat distillation mixed with a splash of rum and a lot of prayers. Pirates called it witch's brew and swore by it until one sailor hallucinated so badly he tried to wrestle with a sea chest. Talk about ruining your fearsome reputation when your crew thinks the ship's haunted by krakens. And the metals? Oh boy. The love-hate relationship pirates had with copper and lead was a disaster in trial and error. Copper was used for the stills themselves, and traces sometimes infused into ointments. Turns out, copper has mild antimicrobial properties, which helped slightly with wound infections. Good news if you've got a hole the size of a cannonball in your leg. Lead, however, thought to have protective and healing properties, turned out to be a nightmare. Some ointments included powdered lead compounds which resulted in chronic lead poisoning. Symptoms included tremors, confusion, and poor coordination. Bad news if you're expected to reload a musket or swing a cutlass. You can probably guess how many fights ended with pirates tripping over their own feet thanks to their own miracle medicine. But hey, no one said medical advancement was tidy when you're living like a floating hellhole. Another big thorn in their side was water. As we touched on earlier, water on ships was typically stored in 63-gallon barrels that sat for weeks. The salt content of seawater is roughly 3.5%, which is obviously disgusting and dehydrating if you drink it. Pirates tried boiling seawater to make it drinkable. Spoiler alert, boiling evaporates the water but leaves salt crystals behind, so you still end up with something close to brine. Filtering seawater through sand or charcoal was attempted, but yielded doubtful results, and often leftover grit was swallowed. Here's where distillation really shined. By boiling seawater in copper stills, pirates captured the steam, which is pure water vapor, and condensed it back into liquid, leaving salt and contaminants behind. It was basically the 17th century version of a desalination plant, though their setup looked more like a pirate science experiment held together by hope and rope. One documented case is Captain William Kidd's ship, the Adventure Galley, which reportedly had a distillation apparatus on board as early as 1698. Logs describe using the device to convert seawater into roughly 2 to 3 gallons of fresh water per 24-hour cycle. For a crew of 30 to 50 men, that's just enough to keep wounds moist and men from dying of dehydration. Not exactly a water factory, but the difference between wet rag and dry rot was life or death. Let's talk about preservation. Food spoilage was a nightmare. Pirates rationed salted meats, dried peas, and hard bread. But without refrigeration, any fresh food went bad within days, turning into a festering swamp of mold and maggots. Some pirates tried soaking bread in rum to preserve it. Bad idea. It made the bread soggy, sweeter, and attracted flies. Others experimented with smoked meats infused with spices and even dipped in their distilled tinctures, hoping the alcohol killed off bacteria. Turns out, alcohol does kill bacteria. Pirates just didn't know this was basic science, so it felt like a little magic or alchemy. Success rates: mixed. Some pirates reported fewer cases of dysentery when they stuck to the rations treated with distilled spirits. Now hygiene on ships was another level of gross, even for pirates. Poor sanitation, cramped quarters, and seasickness meant the decks were often slick with sweat, blood, vomit, and worse. Pirates tried everything from soaking themselves in rum baths to quickly scrubbing wounds with distilled tinctures. The latter worked surprisingly well as an antiseptic, reducing the number of infections. One pirate surgeon, Ambrose Razorhand Flint, kept personal logs showing that ships using distilled alcohol had infection rates nearly 40% lower than those swabbing wounds with seawater or stale urine, which was a thing, believe it or not. Pretty shocking for a bunch of sea thieves without a formal medical degree. Here's a gem. During the infamous Battle of Cape Fear River in 1699, survivors swore that their captain's makeshift distillation tincture helped soldiers withstand the brutal fighting despite multiple saber cuts and gunshot wounds. Logs mention that the tincture stung like vinegar but kept the rotting flesh at bay. That same batch was reportedly made with extracts of wild rosemary, pine needles, and a hint of black pepper distilled into a 20% alcohol base. Think of it as the pirate version of modern antibacterial gel, but with a serious buzz. Sure, the techniques were largely guesswork and often led to poisonings, but they laid groundwork that influenced more formal pharmacology going forward. When pirate life ended and naval medicine evolved, many of these distilled tinctures inspired early medicine formulas in the European apothecaries. The lessons learned, the dangers of lead, the benefits of willow bark, the power of distilled alcohol, were absorbed like stolen treasure, eventually refining the pharmaceutical art. So in a strange way, pirates were pioneers of chemical medicine, just with way fewer safety standards and way more grog. You have to admire their resilience. Imagine trying to survive brutal storms, enemy fire, starvation, and mind-bending boredom on the open ocean, while also playing mad scientist with the only ingredients they had. They couldn't call a doctor, check an online forum, or get antibiotics. They only had experimentation, desperation, and a hell of a lot of stubbornness. Their crude science saved lives, ended others, and created a whole legacy of pirate medicine that's as messy and fascinating as the men who brewed it. So next time you picture a pirate, don't just see the sword and the rum bottle. Picture a crew of accidental chemists mixing poisons and potions on a rocking deck in the middle of nowhere, trying to turn deadly plants and seawater into liquid gold. They were far messier, far less polite than our modern doctors, but their innovation, pretty damn impressive. And if you ever wondered how pirates distilled poison into medicine in 1690, well, now you know.